Please, please don't unzip my clothes.
I'll be gentle.
Please, don't unzip my clothes. The giant mail-order bride. Her heart was shattering because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this, not with him standing so close he might finally see the truth she'd hidden for 22 agonizing years. Silas Thornwell, the rancher who'd buried his heart the day his world burned, had waited 3 days to touch his new wife, giving her time to settle, to trust. But tonight, the waiting was over. "I'll be gentle," he promised, his voice raw with a loneliness that had carved him hollow. And despite her desperate plea, the rancher kept going. His rough, tender hands found the zipper, and she wanted to die right there because he didn't know, God, he didn't know, that the trembling giant towering 6 inches above him was the only woman he'd ever loved. But the rancher kept going, pulling the zipper down with aching slowness, revealing pale skin and the curve of her ribcage, and she was sobbing now, breaking apart as his fingers brushed the edge of. Then Silas Thornwell stopped cold, stopped breathing, stopped existing. His face drained of all color as his eyes locked onto the port wine birthmark shaped like a soaring hawk, the one he'd kissed when they were 10 years old, the one he'd memorized before the flames took everything. Eddie May. The name fell from his lips like a prayer and a curse, his hands trembling now worse than hers, and the giant mail-order bride, his Eddie May, collapsed into his arms, 22 years of grief pouring out in gasps that shattered them both. But if this was his long-lost Eddie May, his childhood love, the girl he'd mourned as dead, why had she come to him as a stranger named Prudence? Why had she let him marry her without saying a word? And what horror had transformed his brave, wild Eddie May into this terrified woman begging him not to see her? The bedroom went silent except for her broken sobs and the howl of Wyoming wind against the log walls. Silas couldn't move. His hands still rested against her ribcage, fingers frozen on that birthmark, that impossible, beautiful, devastating birthmark, and his mind was screaming that this couldn't be real. Eddie May Caldwell died 22 years ago. Everyone said so. The night the outlaws burned his family's ranch, killed his parents, scattered the neighboring families like ashes in the wind. Eddie May and her father, the blacksmith, had vanished. Gone. He'd searched for months before his uncle dragged him east. He'd written letters to every town in the territory. Nothing. No trace, no grave, no goodbye. And he'd learned to live with that hole in his chest, that missing piece that never stopped aching, until he'd finally buried the pain so deep he'd convinced himself he didn't feel anything anymore. But now she was here. Solid. Real. Shaking in. His arms like she might break apart, and he didn't know whether to kiss her or shake her or fall to his knees and weep. Why? The word came out strangled. Why didn't you tell me? She couldn't answer. She was crying too hard, her tall frame folded against him, and he could feel every shudder that racked through her body. He wrapped his arms around her waist and held on because if he let go, she might disappear again, might turn to smoke and leave him with nothing but this birthmark burned into his memory. Eddie May, look at me. He tried to gentle his voice, but it came out desperate. Please, look at me. She raised her head, and Jesus, those eyes. How had he not seen it before? Copper brown, flecked with gold, the same eyes that used to watch him climb trees and chase jackrabbits and promise her the moon when they got older. But these eyes were haunted now. These eyes had seen things that made her afraid of her own husband's touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and her voice was so small, so broken, it didn't match her towering frame at all. "I'm so sorry, Silas. I couldn't." She was gasping for air between words. "You wouldn't have wanted me, not like this, not after—" Her voice cracked and died. "Not wanted you?" He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Eddie May, I looked for you for a year, a whole year. I wrote letters until my fingers bled. I asked every drifter, every merchant, every soul who passed through. I thought you were dead." His voice broke on the last word. "I mourned you. And you're telling me you've been alive this whole time, and you came here, to me, and you didn't say a goddamn word?" The anger flared hot and fast, mixing with relief and joy, and a grief so profound it threatened to drown him. She flinched like he'd struck her, and immediately his anger died. Because this was Eddie May. His Eddie May, and something had hurt her so badly she'd rather lie to him than trust him with the truth. "I'm not angry," he said quickly, though that was a lie. He was furious, but more than that, he was terrified of losing her again. I need to understand. Help me understand, Eddie May. Please." She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself, and he saw the scars then, faint lines across her wrists, a burn mark on her forearm. His stomach turned to ice. "Who did this to you?" His voice went deadly quiet. "Who hurt you?" She shook her head, backing toward the window like a trapped animal. "It doesn't matter now. I'm here. I'm safe. That's all that—" But Silas was already on his feet, and the look on his face must have scared her because she stopped talking. "It matters to me," he said, and every word was a vow. "It matters to me, Eddie May. You're my wife. You've always been mine, even when I thought you were gone. So whoever put those marks on you, whoever made you so afraid you couldn't even tell me your real name—" His hands clenched into fists. "I need to know." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and relentless. Finally, Eddie May spoke, and her voice was barely audible over the wind. "His name is Cyrus Blackwood, and if he finds me here, Silas, he'll kill you." The name hit Silas like a physical blow. Cyrus Blackwood. He knew that name. Every rancher west of the Mississippi knew that name. The railroad magnate, the man who'd bought up half of Wyoming territory through fraud and violence, who crushed anyone who stood in his way. Silas had lost a water rights dispute to one of Blackwood's shell companies 3 years back, had been lucky to keep his ranch at all. "Blackwood," he repeated slowly, and watched Eddie May's face go even paler. "What does Cyrus Blackwood have to do with you?" She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, and he could see her trying to decide whether to keep lying or finally trust him with the truth. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that made her look like a ghost. "After the fire," she began, her voice hollow, "after your ranch burned and my father got scared. He'd seen the outlaws, recognized one of them. He knew they'd come back to silence him." She took a shuddering breath. "So he took what little money we had and put me on a train east. Said he'd follow once he settled accounts. He never came." Silas felt his throat tighten. "Eddie May, I was 12 years old and alone in Philadelphia," she continued, and her voice had gone flat, emotionless, like she was reciting someone else's story. "I had no family, no money, nowhere to go. I slept in alleys until winter came. Then a woman found me. Said she ran a boarding house, said she'd give me work and shelter." Her laugh was bitter, broken. "It wasn't a boarding house, Silas. It was a textile factory. And I wasn't an employee. I was property." The room tilted. Silas grabbed the bedpost to steady himself because he knew where this was going, and he couldn't breathe through the rage building in his chest. "Blackwood owned the factory?" "He owned everything. The building, the equipment, the work contracts." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were dead. "He owned me. For 22 years, I worked 18-hour days in that factory. Couldn't leave, couldn't run. He had men watching, had the law in his pocket. And I was tall, Silas, freakishly tall, strong. Where was I going to hide?" Her voice cracked. "Who was going to want me?" "I would have." The words exploded out of him. "If I'd known, God, Eddie May, if I'd known you were alive, I would have torn that factory down with my bare hands." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I never sent word, because you would have come, and he would have killed you." A tear slipped down her cheek. Blackwood doesn't let anyone take what's his, and somehow in his twisted mind, I was his. He used to come to the factory sometimes, watch us work. He'd walk past my station and touch my hair, my shoulder, and tell me I was his finest investment. She shuddered so violently her teeth chattered. 2 months ago he told me he was going to make me his mistress, said I'd earned the privilege. Silas's vision went red, pure, blinding red. His hands shook with the need to break something, to ride to Philadelphia right now and put a bullet between Cyrus Blackwood's eyes. But Eddie May was still talking, and he forced himself to listen. "That night, I ran." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "There was another girl, younger, smaller. She'd just died of typhoid. No family, no one who'd claim her body. Her name was Prudence Whitmore. I took her papers, cut my hair, stole clothes from the donation bin. She looked down at her hands. I became her. And I saw your advertisement in the Philadelphia newspaper, rancher seeking wife, Wyoming territory, and I thought. She choked on a sob. I thought maybe God was giving me a chance to come home, to be near you, even if you never knew who I really was. But why? Silas crossed to her in 3 strides and gripped her shoulders, not hard but firm enough to make her look at him. Why not just tell me? Did you think I wouldn't recognize you? That I'd forgotten? Look at me. The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. Really look at me, Silas. I'm not the girl you knew. I'm a giant, a freak. I'm scared and broken and used up, and I thought. She was crying again, huge gulping sobs. I thought if you knew it was me, you'd see how far I'd fallen, how much I'd changed, and you'd be disappointed. Or worse, you'd pity me. And I couldn't bear that. I couldn't bear you looking at me the way everyone else does, like I'm something damaged, something less. For a moment, Silas couldn't speak, couldn't process the fact that this woman, his brave, wild Eddie May, who used to climb higher and run faster and laugh louder than any child in the territory, actually believed she was worthless. Then, something broke open inside him, and he did the only thing that made sense. He cupped her face in both hands, pulled her down to his level, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like salt from both their tears. She made a sound against his mouth, surprise maybe, or relief, and then she was kissing him back like she was drowning, and he was air. Her hands fisted in his shirt, his arms wrapped around her waist, and he lifted her, actually lifted her off her feet despite their height difference, and carried her the 3 steps back to the bed. You listen to me, Eddie May Caldwell, he said against her lips, his voice rough and raw. I don't care how tall you are. I don't care what scars you carry. I don't care what Blackwood did or didn't do to you. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. You are mine. You've been mine since we were 10 years old, and you punched Tommy Hendricks for calling me a runt. You're mine, and I'm yours. And nothing, not time, not distance, not Cyrus goddamn Blackwood, is ever going to change that. She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. But I lied to you, she whispered. I married you under a false name. You survived, he cut her off. You did what you had to do to survive, and then you came home, to me. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and he marveled at how something so simple, touching her, holding her, could feel like a miracle. That's all that matters, Eddie May. You came home. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different, softer. I never stopped loving you, she confessed in a broken whisper, even when I thought I'd never see you again, even when I didn't think I deserved you anymore. I never stopped. Then we're even, he said simply, because I never stopped either. For a long moment, they just held each other while the snow fell outside and the fire crackled in the hearth. Silas could feel her heartbeat against his chest, too fast, still frightened, and he made a silent vow that he'd spend every day for the rest of his life making her feel safe again. But first, there was still one problem they hadn't solved. Eddie May, he said carefully, if Blackwood is looking for you, if he's sent men, she tensed in his arms, he will. He doesn't let his property escape. You're not property. The words came out harsh. You're a person, my wife, and I'll be damned if I let him take you. He pulled back to look at her seriously. But I need to know, how much time do we have? How long before his men figure out where you've gone? The fear crept back into her eyes. I don't know. I was careful. Covered my tracks. But Blackwood has resources, money, connections. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. What if he finds me, Silas? What if he comes here? Silas Thornwell smiled then, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd lost everything once and refused to lose it again. Then let him come, he said softly. This is Wyoming territory, not Philadelphia. Out here we handle things differently, and I've got friends, ranchers, deputies, men who owe me favors. If Cyrus Blackwood wants a fight, his arms tightened around Eddie May protectively. He'll get one. 3 weeks passed like a held breath. 3 weeks of Silas teaching Eddie May to be his wife in truth, not in fear, but in joy. He showed her the ranch, the cattle, the land he'd built from nothing. He held her at night when nightmares jerked her awake, whispering promises against her hair until she believed them. He traced that hawk-shaped birthmark with reverent fingers and told her she was beautiful until she stopped flinching when he touched her. And slowly, painfully, wonderfully, his Eddie May started coming back. The girl who laughed, the girl who wasn't afraid. But on a frozen December morning, 3 riders appeared on the horizon, and Silas knew their peace was over. "Stay inside," he told Eddie May, checking his rifle. But she grabbed his arm, her face white with terror. "It's him. It's Blackwood's men. I know it." Her voice shook. "Silas, please, I'll go with them. I won't let them hurt you." He, turned and gripped her face with both hands. "You're not going anywhere. You hear me? Nowhere." Then he kissed her hard and walked out into the snow. 3 men. Professional. Cold-eyed. The one in front was tall, wearing an expensive coat that didn't belong in Wyoming. "You Thornwell?" the man called out. Silas kept his rifle ready. "I am, and you're on my land." The man smiled without warmth. "My employer, Mr. Cyrus Blackwood, believes you have something that belongs to him. A woman, tall, red hair, goes by Prudence Whitmore, but her real name is—" "Eddie May Thornwell," Silas interrupted coldly. "My wife. And she doesn't belong to anyone but herself." The man's smile vanished. "Mr. Blackwood is willing to pay for her return, $5,000, cash, right now." He patted his saddlebag. "Or we can do this the hard way." Silas raised his rifle. "There's no amount of money that buys my wife. So here's how this works. You turn those horses around and ride back east, and you tell Cyrus Blackwood that Eddie May is under my protection, and if he's got a problem with that, he can come himself." The man's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, 6 riders emerged from the trees behind Silas's house. Ranchers, neighbors, hard men with rifles who'd answered Silas's call for help. "Seems you're outnumbered," Silas said quietly. "So I'll ask nice one more time. Leave, now." The standoff lasted 10 eternal seconds. Then, Blackwood's man spat in the snow and wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over, Thornwell." But it was, because as they rode away, Eddie May appeared in the doorway, tall and fierce and unafraid, and Silas saw his childhood love transformed into the woman she was always meant to be, a woman who'd survived hell and come out stronger. She walked to him through the snow, and when she reached him, she didn't tremble. She stood tall. "Is it really over?" she asked. Silas pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her solid and real and safe in his arms. "It's over, Eddie May. You're home, and nothing's ever taking you away again." That night, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Eddie May traced the scar on his ribs, the one from the fire that started everything, and whispered, "I love you, Silas Thornwell." And he traced the hawk on her skin and whispered back, "I love you too, Eddie May Thornwell. Always have, always will." Outside, the Wyoming wind howled, but inside they were warm, safe, together, the way they were always meant to be. And when spring came, Silas would file legal papers to make sure Cyrus Blackwood could never claim her. But for now, this moment was enough. His giant mail-order bride, his childhood love, finally home where she belonged. Spring came to Wyoming with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wild flowers, and Eddie May Thornwell stood in the doorway of her home, watching her husband work with the horses in the corral. 6 months had passed since Blackwood's men rode away defeated, and in that time, something miraculous had happened. She'd learned to breathe again, without fear choking every breath. Silas had filed papers with the territorial judge, legal documents that severed any claim Cyrus Blackwood might have had on her work contract. He'd called in favors, spent money they didn't have on lawyers, and made sure that on paper and in law, Eddie May was free. Truly free. For the first time in 22 years. But freedom, she was learning, wasn't just about papers and laws. It was about the small moments, like now, watching Silas gentle a skittish mare with patient hands, the same hands that touched her with such reverence every night. It was about laughing again without feeling guilty for finding joy. It was about standing tall, all 6 feet and 2 inches of her, and not apologizing for taking up space in the world. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the small swell there that had started showing just last week, and smiled through sudden tears. New life, growing inside her, a piece of her and Silas, made from love instead of fear. "You gonna stand there grinning all day, or you gonna tell me what's got you so happy?" Silas called out, and the teasing warmth in his voice still made her heart skip. She walked toward him through the grass, and he met her halfway, sweaty and dusty from work, but looking at her like she was the only beautiful thing in the world. "I have something to tell you," she said softly, and took his hand, placing it on her belly. For a moment, he didn't understand. Then his eyes went wide, his mouth fell open, and he looked at her with such pure, devastating joy that she started crying. "A baby?" His voice cracked. "We're having a baby?" "We're having a baby," she confirmed through her tears, and then she was laughing because Silas let out a whoop that probably scared every horse on the ranch and actually lifted her despite their height difference, and spun her around right there in the middle of the yard. "Easy," she gasped, laughing harder. "Put me down before you hurt yourself." He set her down but didn't let go, his forehead pressed against hers, his hands cradling her face like she was made of something precious. "A baby," he whispered again, and she could hear the wonder in his voice. "Our baby. Eddie May, His voice broke completely, and she realized he was crying too. They stood there holding each other as the sun climbed higher, and the birds sang and the world turned beautiful around them, and Eddie May thought about the girl she'd been, 10 years old, carving promises into an oak tree with a boy who promised her the moon. She thought about the woman she'd become, broken, scared, convinced she was worthless. And she thought about who she was now. Eddie May Thornwell, wife, soon-to-be mother, a woman who'd survived hell and found her way home. "I was so afraid," she whispered against Silas's chest. "For so long, I was so afraid that I'd never get to have this, a real life, a family, love." "You have it now," Silas said fiercely, pulling back to look into her eyes. "You have all of it, Eddie May, and I swear on everything I am, I will spend every day making sure you never forget how loved you are, how wanted, how absolutely perfect you are, exactly as you are." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises. "Our child is going to grow up knowing nothing but love. And they're going to have your strength, your courage, your beautiful heart, and whether they're tall or short, boy or girl, they're going to know they're wanted, that they belong, that they're home." Eddie May couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded and held him tighter. Later, they would walk to that oak tree together, the one with their childhood initials still carved in the bark, and Silas would carve 3 more letters below them, one for the baby growing inside her, one for the family they were building, one for the future that had seemed impossible just months ago. But for now, this moment was enough. The sun warm on their faces, his arms strong around her, her hand on the miracle growing inside her, and the absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Eddie May leaned against her husband's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you." Silas kissed the top of her head. "For what?" And she smiled, watching the hawk circle overhead, wild and free and soaring. "For keeping your promise, for still loving me after all these years, for giving me back my life." He laced his fingers through hers and squeezed gently. "Eddie May Thornwell, loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. Always has been, always will be." If this story reminded you that some love is worth waiting for, that healing is possible, and that home is wherever your heart belongs, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because every person deserves to find their way back to the love they thought they'd lost forever.